Yeah, joining us, Department of Corrections Commissioner Paul Schnell, who's had a busy, well, you're always busy, but certainly the last 10 weeks or so have been more intense, including last week in Washington, D.C., which we'll talk about in a minute. First, from your standpoint, as we talk about the drawdown here, Tom Homan talking about hundreds more officers leaving now this week. What is your sense of where we are in that drawdown phase?
Well, I mean, the exact numbers we're not entirely clear on, but we do know that they drew down that initial group of about 700. Now hundreds more going out. But what that really means and exactly what that timeline looks like, we don't know.
You continue to have meetings with Tom Homan?
We continue to have communications with either Mr. Homan or representatives working with him.
Okay. Last week, on Thursday, you spent a good chunk of the day in front of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs alongside Congressman Emmer, Attorney General Ellison, and much of that, some of it was contentious, certainly in questions to the Attorney General. Yours was not, at least not what I saw. A significant amount of time in which you continued to try to clear up what you have said are either misrepresentations or mischaracterizations, or sometimes just flat out not factually correct.
That's right.
Do you think in your testimony some of that got through?
Well, I do think. I think that what we were raising was the proposition for this massive surge to Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
They talked about this, gave the sense that there was just wild levels of, criminal illegal aliens across the state. And yet the data that they were sharing simply did not match up. And so it really prompted the question, what was the basis that informed this massive 3,000 agents being sent to our state?
And again, what you were able to go over there at the Capitol in front of a congressional committee here is much of the same messaging and numbers that you've been going over for the past month. It was January 15th when I think one of the initial news releases from your department came out addressing some of these number discrepancies that you couldn't balance out here. The 1,300 plus people that were in the system that you couldn't come out with. And much of those numbers remained consistent to what you told the Senate committee last week.
Well, right. Not only were those numbers consistent, but we also were hearing different messages came out of the White House, some out of DHS, and then certainly some locally. And remember that in the early days of Operation Metro Surge, there was no communication between state and federal officials or local officials. That just didn't happen. And that's unheard of, really, when you think about federal-state cooperation, because there has been a long-standing history at both the investigations level and even on the immigration side with the State Department of Corrections, high levels of cooperation, and yet that was not reflected in these numbers.
So the difference here when Tom Homan came in and took over the operations, I mean, we didn't see as much of him, but it sounds like he was very busy getting himself in front of a lot of other people. That communication is what changed. So prior to his arrival, there was no communication between folks in Minnesota at your department, county jails, and say Greg Bovino and others that were here. He's saying that doesn't seem to have existed.
That didn't exist
at all.
At all. And we attempted to make connection, have communication, but that was not reciprocated at all. And that's where the messaging became such a concern.
Do you think there was a lack of interest in communication? What was your sense of why there was no line of communication there?
Well, I think there was a lot of challenges in terms of this operation was put together with a level of haste. One of the things that we know in law enforcement, and especially in joint investigations, or large operations, pre-planning and collaboration and really strong lines of communication, command and control, does become immensely important. And one of the things we talk about in investigations is deconfliction, working across agency to make sure that there isn't conflict in the investigative efforts so that you're not putting your own personnel in danger or the public in danger. And I think what we saw happen was oftentimes a lack of deconfliction and communication even between and among the federal agencies, Customs and Border Patrol and ICE, that simply wasn't happening. And that is a major concern and was a major concern, and yet there was no opportunity for us to share information with them, to get information from them, and efforts that we made to try and have that happen didn't occur.
And one of the things that I noticed, and many did too, is that Tom Homan's initial news conference, and I think he said it every time, he was very clear to point out that the Minnesota prison system, the Department of Corrections, complies with ICE detainers,
Right.
which is what you had been saying for quite a while now. And then he came out and clearly said that that hadn't been said before. How significant was that for him to put that message out there?
Well, I think, when I had the opportunity to participate in meeting with him and the governor and my colleague out at the Department of Public Safety, and I think, that was made clear. He understood that, yet we still had other levels in federal government not acknowledging and recognizing that fact, which becomes frustrating because there's mixed messaging happening.
Okay.
And I think one of the things that Tom Homan did was try to really get a level of clarity. And he did. He met with a lot of stakeholders, sheriffs and local law enforcement leaders, legislators, you name it.
Yeah. And I've talked to some of those people who talked to me about that, and also saying that communication wasn't there, that it potentially, they were making these accusations about Minnesota because they didn't know what was actually, the laws and the procedures here. So when Tom Homan talks about this unprecedented cooperation, which he has, since he got here, and, talking to other folks on the Minnesota side, state and local, they say, well, we haven't really changed anything. What do you think he's referring to in terms of the cooperation that's changed that he saw was instrumental to then a drawdown?
Well, I think the only thing that really changed was the level of communication.
Okay.
On the ground, operationally, there has not been significant changes. And so that's one of the confusing aspects of this. It begins to raise the prospect of, was there more to this than just the changes in practices or processes? Was this, in fact, a recognition of the challenges that they were facing here in the state?
So again, now is this drawdown is ongoing? We don't have an exact timeline for it. Where does that put you now in terms of this ongoing relationship, or communication, I should say? How have things changed for you in the last couple of weeks at all?
Well, I think for us operationally, it's business as usual.
Yeah.
And I think the DOC staff and the staff at ICE that those staff, work with on a day-to-day basis, that remains strong and has throughout this. It was really when the surge began and then messages around what was happening that did not match the operational reality, that's where the frustration became. And then, I think it is important for us to ask the question, why 3,000 agents sent to Minnesota, more than any other place in the country? And then the lack of operational clarity, what the scope and focus of that operation was, I think remains a concern and a question.
Yeah, and one of the things that you mentioned in your testimony last week to the Senate committee was sort of the variable nature of the mission here. That first it was, to address fraud among the immigrant population, and then it was something else, and then it was something else. That led to some of the issues, and did that change? The clarity change?
I think, I don't know that the clarity really changed. I think one of the reasons that Senator Rand Paul had invited me to come and testify was the fact that I think the Senate and the chairman clearly wanted to have a clearer sense of what was the motive and how was it that we made the decision, they made the decision to send 3,000 agents to Minnesota. And I don't know that answer was ever became clear in the end, but that was really what the chairman's focus was, and then to understand the implications of that and what needs to happen going forward was his goal.
We should point out too, when you talk about better communication, you still haven't gotten clarification of the math from Department of Homeland Security about the numbers that they said were in custody here and the numbers that they claimed had been released. The communication's been better, but those numbers have never been clarified how they came to those numbers.
No, those numbers have never been clarified.
Yep.
While we have provided them with documentation of
Yep.
our numbers, given them lists of names, they have not provided us lists of their targets, and that's always a concern. If you want to work together, then let's work together. But these things remain a concern, and I think, in the interest of transparency, that was certainly one of the goals we had, and yet oftentimes some of those conversations appeared somewhat one-sided.
Okay, so what happens now as the drawdown continues, and then beyond that, what is the lasting impact of what the state's been through and what you've been through as the commissioner of the Department of Corrections?
Well, I think, operationally within the DOC and the practices there, that will continue, because we do recognize that immigration enforcement does have a role, and we want people who are the bad actors, who do not have an immigration status here, to be deported. That's what should happen after they have served their sentence, and that's really important. There was some who argued, and even the White House fairly recently suggested, just let those people out of prison, those 380 people, and let's get them deported. And yet, some of those people are serving sentences for really horrific offenses. And those victims, and our state has a justice interest in at least making them serve out the custodial portion of that sentence. So I don't think that you're going to see any big changes there. What I do hope is that that certainly we have a better sense of who it is that they're focusing on. But it's also important that we begin to understand the implications of this operation for our state. We have 2 Minnesotans that were killed, and is there clarity about the investigation into those deaths? That's a major concern, and should be for all of us.
Yeah.
Because there is both a federal interest, but there is also a state interest, and the states, by virtue of our Constitution, have a sovereign role.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that even as the immigration actions sort of wind down or back to a normal level, that the investigations into the shooting deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, that remains something where the federal government has said we will not give evidence to the State Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. That has not changed.
Unheard of. And it's unheard of, Rob. And I think this is important for people to recognize that there's a long-standing practice of coming out of law enforcement, where I know that we collaborate, we're on task forces together, doing things like human trafficking investigations and large-scale drug investigations, where decades of really strong collaborative investigations. And 2 Minnesotans killed on Minnesota streets in a Minnesota community, and our Bureau of Criminal Apprehension does not have access to that crime scene, does not have access to that evidence. Unheard of.
And they have reiterated that again, that they will not be sharing it. Do you think that has the potential to change, or do you think they're pretty much dug in that they're not going to cooperate?
I hope it changes, but by all appearances, it's dug in and a decision's been made. Now, what the state can do with that, what a prosecutor can do with the limited evidence they have access to, that remains to be seen. But I think we should all be concerned that this investigation get the level of focus and transparency. I mean, think about today, a law enforcement involved shooting, and oftentimes within days, a week, body camera footage is being released.
Yeah.
And here, I mean, our BCA had to secure a search warrant to get access to a crime scene on a Minnesota street, and we're prohibited access. That's staggering and concerning.
And that will continue to be an ongoing issue here. Past the immigration surge, enforcement surge, that remains an ongoing issue for probably quite the foreseeable future.
Absolutely, it does.
Paul Schnell, Commissioner of Department of Corrections. You've had always a busy time, but certainly lately. Thanks for coming in to talk about where we go from here and what we've learned.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks a
you
lot.
so much.